Chapter 8. Sonda's flying saucer followed the African coast southward at an unimaginable speed. Gripping the control handles, Dario observed the blurred line of the coast that was very familiar to him, given his extensive geographical and aeronautical knowledge. From time to time he glanced at Sonda, who lay beside him, her head resting on her knees. Every time Dario saw the magical eye on the woman's belt flicker, his heart skipped a beat, because he sensed that the news Sonda was receiving couldn't be very good for them. But in such uncertainty, he preferred to ignore it rather than ask her. Nevertheless, Sonda was transmitting telepathically. The general staff of Hugh Paul's revolutionary government is gathered in Killimane, now turned into a stronghold and arsenal of the Central Army. If it weren't for Karen and Schwartz, you should ask Sutton to raise everything in a surprise attack. Yes, you've requested that the laboratory be spared, as you will be there rescuing your friends. But Paul can also take refuge in the laboratory. The special order to Major Herkel's Martian flotilla stated that the laboratory is a red-colored building, with a large garden around it. Nearby is the large hangar that contains the immobilized Valther II, as well as my robots. Well, I must tell you, Dario. When Mason stole my ship in Vesta, I was glad. I could have had my robots return the Valther II and capture Mason, but that would have meant losing you. So I let them reach Earth. You were the only one I cared about at those moments. But then, seeing you sunk, shattered, anguished, and distant from me, when you rejected me, I changed my mind and built you this flying device. Later, when this struggle ends, I will explain another important reason that influenced me to change my thinking. Now focus on the controls. I'm very tired, Dario. Dario Cox listened to her in silence. He had transmitted the special orders to Sutton and Herkel, and was now monitoring the vessel's progress in the sky. 5 minutes before reaching the designated landing spot, Dario received 2 consecutive messages through his wrist radio transmitter. One was from Sutton, providing his position and announcing that he would take action at the agreed time. The other was from Major Herkel, also communicating that he had contacted Clark Sutton and would act as a sweep half an hour after Sutton's vessels. Everything was going well. However, no sooner had Dario finished acknowledging the messages than he felt a strong explosion, and the vessel was violently shaken. "We've been detected, Dario," said Sonda. "It's an anti-aircraft advance party. You must head inland, away from the coast." "The feast has already begun," commented Basil Tyrrell ironically, preparing the firing mechanism of the atomic rifle that Dario had given him. "It's a shame we don't have our armored vests here. But we'll see how to get some." Another explosion rocked them, this time closer than the previous one, but Dario maneuvered skillfully, distancing themselves from danger at a mind-boggling speed, far superior to that of the anti-aircraft weapons and even more so to Paul's slow amphibious rockets. With brief words, Dario now gave instructions to his companions. Everyone listened in silence, and Dario noticed that Bobby Green began to sweat lightly upon hearing him. The situation was dire. Because, against all common sense, what Dario intended was, more or less, a collective suicide. Landing in the heart of the enemy's headquarters. "Sonda can't do much," said Dario. "Therefore, Mark will take command of the vessel, and when the 3 of us have touched down, he will ascend into the sky like a bullet. And don't worry about us anymore. Sonda will tell me from above how I can pilot the Valther I once it's in our hands. The rest I leave in God's hands. Let him decide." No one objected a word. Minutes later, enveloped in multicolored lights, among which spotlights, atomic grenades, and cosmic rays fiercely fought to reach them, the saucer and its occupants descended at a suicidal speed, making it difficult for anti-aircraft defenses to target them. The city was shrouded in shadows, but the violet light from the explosions made the outlines of the buildings quite visible. Dario had his hands clenched on the descent controls and didn't take his eyes off the altimeter, praying as much as one could to prevent the landing from failing. From more than 12,000 meters of altitude, one mistake would be catastrophic. He planned to reduce speed from 100 meters to 0, and then brake sharply at ground level. Sonda had told him the vessel would hold, but he wasn't very sure. During the dizzying descent, grenades always exploded high, as such speed had been conceived by no one except that crazy adventurer. The altimeter was also rapidly descending, and suddenly it reached 100. Dario acted simultaneously, but the shake they received was more than brutal in the last 100 meters, down to absolute zero. All of them, except Dario, who remained glued to his post like a barnacle, were thrown towards the lower deck of the ship. Then, the shock absorber acted, and the vessel landed, tilted, on the ground, returning all its occupants to their initial positions, albeit in a confused heap. Without hesitating for a second, Dario maneuvered to open the hatch and shouted, "Come on, Mark, take command. You two, out with me." In almost simultaneous leaps, Dario Cox, Basil Tyrrell, and Bobby Green launched themselves out and started running. Dario saw several spotlights scanning the ground in search of them. They were near a metallic fence, close to a high wall. To his left was a barbed wire fence. Dario didn't waste a second to orient himself, and when he saw the spotlight fall on them, he ordered them to lie on the ground. The spotlight also shone on the flying saucer. But at that very instant, it released several red flames from its circular nozzles and shot up into the black sky like a spark. Everything had happened so quickly that no one had time to react, except Dario and his companions, who acted swiftly, slipping close to the ground away from the spotlights before the machine guns installed on the wall began spewing fire. "Let's hurry towards there. We have to cross that fence, and I think the best way is through the door." He also realized something else. The spotlights were no longer illuminating them, but were ascending into the sky in pursuit of the strange flying object. Immediately, the anti-aircraft guns thundered again. Without wasting a second, the three ran along the metallic fence towards where they believed the entrance to that barred enclosure was. And the sudden light from the atomic grenades in the sky revealed to Dario, as it was heading ahead, two important things. First, that within the barred enclosure, less than half a mile away, was the red laboratory they were searching for. And second, that at that very instant, a sentinel had discovered them. Dario, running at full speed and determined not to use the pistol he wielded except as a last resort, approached the sentinel who was preparing his rifle. Dario thought he was a rookie soldier for two reasons. He didn't have his weapon ready, given the prevailing alarm, and in his nervousness, he had forgotten to shout the attack signal. And this was a pity for him, as Dario always acted at an almost incredible speed. And when the soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, something like a human panther, as he thought, pounced on him, and with a violent swipe tore the weapon from his hands, also plunging him into a deep and sweet sleep with another blow to the jaw. Dario had never struck with such fury as on that occasion. He even felt the soldier's jaw crunch against his hardened knuckles. Then, Dario performed a test he had wanted to conduct ever since he discovered the fence. He took the body of the fallen soldier and lifted him halfway above his head to throw him against the fence's spikes. But when the unfortunate man came into contact with the bristling spikes, his body was jolted by a horrifying electric shock, instantly carbonizing him. The three adventurers were dazzled by the impressive blue spark. The fence was connected to a high-voltage circuit, and it triggered the consequent alarm, as whistles and the wailing of several sirens were heard immediately. "We've been discovered, Dario. Now our lives are worth less than a penny," shouted Bobby behind Dario. The aforementioned smiled, because those words reflected the young pilot's state of mind. But the events had only accelerated. "I'm going to throw a grenade at the fence to see if we can make a breach. Then run and get over the flames, keeping in mind that a tenth of a second paused over the radioactive emanations will be our death. Running isn't enough, we have to fly without touching the ground. I advise you to use this wall as support to gain momentum and jump. Get down, here it comes." And combining action with words, with all the strength in his arm, he threw a small atomic grenade, which he had previously stripped of its lead wrapping. The infernal ball traveled a distance of more than 20 meters towards the fence. At the same moment, a group of soldiers was running towards the fence from the inside. The three intrepid adventurers threw themselves to the ground. And immediately, a horrifying explosion shook the area. The expansive force almost lifted Dario off the ground, because he was the one protecting his companions. But after a second, and as the red smoke mushroom ascended into the sky, he got up and, still buzzing from the roar, ran like a soul chased by the devil towards the place where the patrol and fence had disappeared. Behind him, with identical speed, his two friends ran, who in the blink of an eye reached the breach and leapt like greyhounds over the hole made in the ground, more than 3 meters wide. Dario crossed it with a jump, but Bobby had to skirt around him, feeling his shoes burn in the fractions of a second that his feet trotted over that contaminated volcano. But they passed like breaths and ran towards the red building. From a turret, they fired at them with simple ray automatic weapons. But dodging and zigzagging, Dario also fired an orange flare, and they ceased firing. "There, towards the main door," shouted Dario. He saw more silhouettes running ahead of him, and beams of light shooting from various weapons. But on this occasion, it was Tyrrell's rifle that took down those bodies, throwing them to the ground like Dario and Bobby, and shooting at the same time. The bodies bent over, cut down by death, and their screams blended with those of the distant explosions. Commands, shouts, curses, blasphemies were heard, and above that indescribable chaos, Dario Cox, crawling up to a bush, shouted with all his lung power, "Surrender to Explorer Dario Cox." That name had echoed in hundreds of battles, and Dario knew the effect it produced. Therefore, he didn't want to waste the opportunity to shout loudly, hoping to provoke some hesitation. But besides boasting, Dario knew how to act. And this is what he did next, standing up and running towards the red building. His pistol flashed again, aimed at the doorway, where, on an inclined ramp, a group of men took cover with their rifles ready. However, the name Dario Cox must have struck a chord with those men, because none of them fired. Dario, without hesitating, jumped onto the ramp, seeing at the same time Tyrrell and Green running towards the other end of the large entrance, where a group of officers were scolding the disoriented troops. Tyrrell pointed his rifle at them, firing several radioactive shots that dispersed them on the spot, except those who were immediately disintegrated. At the end of the ramp, Dario entered the building through a narrow door. He passed through a room and headed to the back staircase. There, at the foot of the stairs, he found a soldier staring at him with wide eyes. A white light descended from the ceiling, and the expression of terror and astonishment that Dario saw on the soldier's face prevented him from shooting him, as the cowardly man dropped the rifle he was holding and raised his hands. Dario aimed his gun, questioning him sternly, "Where's Paul's great traitor?" "I don't know." "I don't know, sir," stammered the terrified young man. "I think he's upstairs, in the laboratory's meeting room." "Upstairs, on the top floor." "Guide me there, or I'll leave you stuck on the spot." The push Dario gave was enough for the soldier to run up the stairs, like a panicked man. But Dario wasn't trusting at all, because at every turn of the staircase, the soldier protected himself behind his body and gripped his weapon, ready to fire. Thus, he saved the life once more, because from the upper floor, after they had turned the staircase twice, someone fired at them with an atomic pistol. The shot made sparks fly on the ground in front of Dario. The soldier ducked aside and tried to retreat, but Dario, firing simultaneously upwards, shouted, "Stay still, coward." A roar sounded above them, and a burning body bounced and fell down the stairs. "Keep going upstairs, hurry," added Dario, violently pushing his trembling and corpse-like guide. They climbed again, dodging the smoking body of the major general officer who lay dead in a corner of the landing. They passed by him without paying attention, and then the soldier pointed to the door that remained ajar before them. "Over there is the great hall." "You go ahead," roared Dario. "No," cried the other. "I'd rather you kill me first. The bosses could be inside, and—" Dario understood and pushed him aside. He took out another small grenade from its lead wrapping and adjusted it for reduced effect, trusting not to bring down the entire building. And with a serenity that left the unfortunate soldier stunned, he extended his arm and threw the explosive into the room. A horrifying explosion silenced several howls and exclamations that had taken place simultaneously with the blast. And despite the expansive force, which tore the door open and through whose hole a terrifying blaze emerged, Dario, stuck to the ground beside the soldier, sprang to his feet and stormed into the room like a hurricane. The scene inside was fantastic because, in addition to a large breach in the floor that connected to the lower floor, several half-destroyed corpses were seen crushed against the cracked walls. The furniture was shattered and burning, and some walls were split. He saw no more because he sensed someone running to the other side, up a wide staircase, and a door, half unhinged from its hinges, which 3 men were trying to close from inside an elevator. Cox's pistol fired its death ray at them, and the 3 were twisting inside the immobile and deteriorated cage. After this, Dario ran towards the staircase, dodging furniture and objects as well as the large floor breach. He felt the floor wobble under his feet but reached the stairs unscathed, running up them like a deer, jumping the steps 3 at a time, with the most vivid concern reflected on his face. And at that moment, in his brain, he felt the telepathic influence of someone warning him from many thousands of kilometers high. Sonda was finally guiding him. There, behind that door, are Paul and Karen and Professor Schwartz. You still have time. The traitor is waiting for you. He has 2 generals by his side, and they are behind an electric machine with which they are trying to torture and break the will of the... No, don't enter yet. Wait a minute, as General Sutton's Hawks are about to take action. The great bombardment will distract them, and you can surprise them. Dario Cox thanked heaven for that providential help and approached the door, whose upper part was covered by a stained glass window. He gripped the atomic pistol tightly and had his lips pressed so hard that they were bleeding from his teeth. He peered along the wide hallway that showed smaller doors on both sides. Along the way, he murmured, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He physically clung to the wall and felt his heart beat as he thought of Karen and the mistreatment she had suffered at the hands of the traitor Paul, 1,000 times murderer and criminal. He believed he was seeing a devastated Karen, like those bodies left behind in the Great Hall. I know you love her, Dario, he perceived Sonda transmitting from her flying saucer. You never managed to deceive me. Now go save her, and may both of you be very happy. Be careful. There was no need for a warning, because Cox was alert, monitoring the hallway. Such vigilance allowed him to see a shadow projected on the ground as a door silently opened, something beyond the colored one, behind which was Paul. First, the barrel of a weapon appeared, and then a hand. But Dario fired first, and his aim was true, hitting the man dressed as an officer who was sneaking out through that door. The man fell, bending at the waist, without making a single complaint, to lie on the ground, dead. And at that very instant, as Dario looked at his victim with a stern expression, the entire building seemed to shake as if hit by a violent earthquake, while the sky filled with a thunderous noise. Sutton, shouted Cox. Now these miserable people will know what an atomic bombardment is. Come on inside, Dario, ordered Sonda through space. Right now, they are turning their backs, looking out the window. And when Dario opened the door with a violent kick, breaking all the glass that the tremor from the distant explosions was making vibrate intensely, the first thing he encountered was Karen Vasiev herself, fleeing towards the door, terrified, meeting him. Q. Paul and 2 generals in gleaming uniforms suddenly turned around, wielding their weapons. For Dario's intrusion into the room had been awaited for some time. Dario Cox, exclaimed Karen and Schwartz simultaneously, the latter standing up from the chair he had been sitting in. And the Russian girl, in her unconsciousness caused by the nervous tension she had endured, clung to the neck of the newly arrived man, preventing him from moving at the moment when Dario needed to be free to act swiftly. Dario, my life. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. At that very instant, without Dario being able to pull the young Russian away in time, the weapons the 2 generals were wielding fired deadly shots. And their lethal rays were aimed at Karen and Dario, with nothing and no one able to save them now. The moment of death had arrived, and Dario, who saw it, only had time to close his eyes.